Welcome back to Talking Europe. Well, we were looking in the first half of the show at the EU-Canada trade deal or no deal. Our next guest might be able to tell us a bit more about that, but also give us an insight into the economic fallout from the UK's vote, the state of the EU's economy in general, and tell us what's going to happen with countries that are not playing by EU deficit rules. Welcome, Mr. Pierre Moscovici. You're the French Commissioner at the EU Commission for Economic Affairs. Let's start perhaps with this UK question. The second biggest economy of the EU has voted to leave. Where does that leave the EU economically?
Well, economically, it's too early to say because one thing is not evident in everybody's mind, but the UK is inside the European Union and will be inside the European Union with all duties and all rights which go alongside until the moment it leaves. And they won't leave before Article 15
yes, so it's a few
is
years
raised
away
by the next government of the United Kingdom, and then it opens a process of negotiation for 2 years. The second reason why it's too early to say is because I don't think that it is something which is mandatory. It depends on our own reaction. I'm convinced that if we are capable of dealing with the Brexit properly and orderly, then we will lower uncertainty, and so we will also lower the risks of a Brexit. And second, those who will stay inside the EU need to reinvent themselves, to be capable of investing more, also to strengthen the eurozone. And if they do so, then the capacity of growing will be intact. But we need to do both. First, combat uncertainty, then also reinforce our own economic strengths.
Yeah, I have a lot of lead-off questions from that reply. Perhaps looking at the eurozone in particular, because indeed after this Brexit vote, a lot of people are saying, now what does the EU at 27, what's their plan for the future, even if it is a few years away? Do we go for more integration? I know the French finance minister has said that the eurozone is the Achilles heel of the EU at the moment, and we definitely need to push for more integration, a common budget, a common stance. Is that necessary? Is it possible?
Well, first, we need to deal with the UK exit and to do that orderly and to do that in a friendly manner.
But we could still look at the eurozone.
Tomorrow, UK won't be inside the EU, but will still be a European country. As a Frenchman, I cannot forget that Free France was in London during World War II. That Churchill played a huge role, that Great Britain is part of NATO, that it is a permanent member of the Security Council, that we have all agreements on defense, and this will have to go on. And we need also to see how we share the markets and other freedoms. So that's one thing. The second thing we need to do is to strengthen the EU at 27, and especially to be capable of protecting our own borders and our citizens against terrorism, to tackle with the refugee issue. That is very important. And the third thing that we need to do, for those who share the euro, we need to have, I would say, an economic policy which is tomorrow as strong as the monetary policy, and also to have a more democratic and more efficient governance of the eurozone. I'm in favor of a Minister of Finance for the eurozone who would be a member of the Commission.
Well, let's look a little bit at the UK economy. It hasn't been good since that vote, which is perhaps understandable. It's only been 2 weeks. We've seen some wobbles. Do you think, though, that's only a short-term issue, or do you think that can have a knock-on effect on the rest of the EU? I believe I read that the Netherlands GDP, the forecast was that it would be down something like 0.7% this year.
Again, it's too early to say.
Even in our immediate year.
Immediately, what everybody can see is that those who promised the paradise after Brexit were liars. There is no paradise. There is no political paradise for them. Boris Johnson was not capable of fighting for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage stays here, and it's a shame, but it gets out of the chair of the UKIP. And you see also some turmoil inside the Conservative as well as the Labour Party.
And for the UK, I guess we need them to trigger this Article 50 to actually put it in place. Everybody's saying that the EU has to wait for the UK to trigger this article. But is there not another article in the Lisbon Treaty that would allow the EU to push this Article 7?
No. Article 7 is another kind of article, which is sanctioning non-cooperative countries not obeying to our common values. It's not the case. Again, the British vote has to be respected. I can regret that. I can think it's a mistake, but it's democracy. And so the British people should not be and cannot be punished for their vote. Again, it's legitimate.
Well, indeed, we look now at the British...
But as you're calling about Article 50, let's not wait too much time, because time wasted is uncertainty. And uncertainty is bad for markets and for investors and also for politicians. And nothing can happen which is really enthusiastic and positive when we don't start this negotiation. So I can understand that there is a process inside the Conservative Party, but as soon as they have a Prime Minister,
it needs to move fast.
Well, now it's time to go fast.
OK, well, let's take a quick look at movements over in the UK. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, has been looking at trying to ensure his country's economic survival, if you like. He's looking to reduce corporate tax down 15% to keep businesses there. Delana D'Souza tells us more.
It's the first business survey held in Britain after the historic decision to leave the European Union. The proportion of businesses pessimistic about the economy has jumped to 49% from just 25% before the vote. They fear domestic sales, exports and investments will fall off a cliff over the next 12 months. Authorities in the UK are scrambling to avoid an exodus of companies. Finance Minister George Osborne said he would slash the corporate tax rate to below 15% from the current 20%. It's a plan that's already facing resistance from the European Union.
Going to 15% doesn't seem a good initiative. We shouldn't enter exacerbated fiscal competition or fiscal dumping.
If George Osborne does stick to his word, it would be bad news for other major European economies where businesses are taxed considerably more, with the exception of Ireland. It has the lowest corporate tax rate of any EU member at 12.5%. Ireland's finance minister, meanwhile, isn't surprised by Osborne's suggestion.
2 years ago, I enunciated the principle of bringing UK corporation tax rates down, and he said that he'd have the rate down to 17% by 2020. So 15 or less isn't a million miles away from.
Britain's vote to leave the European Union has sent the pound into free fall, benefiting domestic exporters. On Tuesday, the currency hit a fresh 31-year low against the dollar.
Well, national taxes, taxes across the EU are a national issue as opposed to the Brussels issue, if you like. And we heard there that the UK was already moving towards reducing its corporate tax. But at the same time, once it leaves the EU, it could really drop them very, very low. Will that not have a negative knock-on effect on the rest of us?
I had to react because I'm also Commissioner for Taxation. I work well for a long time with George Osborne. I was Finance Minister, now Commissioner. I know that we cooperate in order to reduce, to fight tax evasion, tax avoidance. And the movement in Europe is not aggressive competition on corporate tax. It's rather today to try to be closer. That's what we are doing.
Since the LuxLeaks, they're trying to be closer.
LuxLeaks, Panama Papers. Recently, we accepted a directive on anti-tax avoidance. So I think that a kind of tax dumping is not the correct answer to the situation we're in. That's not what we can do. Of course, there can be tax competition, but I don't think that is the proper way to handle it. Second, there could be, if that went through, consequences also on Great Britain's budget, because you would lose resources, and either you would have more deficit, and the deficit is not low in Great Britain, either you need to tax other people. So you need to deal with that. From the point of view of the European Union, no, I would say let's try to avoid as much as possible aggressive tax competition between us. That's not the spirit of what we are doing in the G20, in the G7, in OECD framework.
EU borders. Fair enough. Now, one thing the UK were expecting them to look at is this access to the EU single market when they leave. However, that would play in this freedom of movement. Switzerland has, access to the single market, but it had a referendum not too long ago calling on its leaders to stop, to letting migrants in. Where does Switzerland stand now with its access to the EU's market, and is there a deal possible? A lot of people say, well, when it comes down to it, money is money.
You see that when you've got that kind of referendums, you have a lot of problems because it's really hard for the Swiss. I spoke recently with Swiss ministers, very hard to implement. But again, let's not jump to the conclusion. We'll have to negotiate. We'll see at the end of the negotiation which model you can choose. There is that one, the Swiss model. There is also the Norwegian model. What we all say is that if you want to have freedom of some movements, and especially capital movements, you need to have all the freedoms of the single market. That is
perhaps
something
with an emergency break that
you cannot have pick and choose.
Okay. So
that
was going to stand firm on this?
That was very clear in the conclusions of the European Council last week.
Well, let's look now. We saw Slovakia taking over the presidency of the EU since the 1st of July. One thing its head of state, Robert Fico, has said that he really wants the EU Commission to look at Spain and Portugal as they're breaching EU deficit rules. There has been a delay in, since 2013, Spain got an extra 3 years to get its deficit below that 3% of GDP, which is the EU rule. It still hasn't done that. In 2015, it was 5%. Forecast for this year is 4%. Why the delay?
The delay is due to our complex rules, which are more intelligent and flexible than one believes. And we take into account the economic situation, and the difficulty to diminish nominal targets. We must not forget that Spain is a country who had a terrible crisis, where unemployment is over 20%, for the youngsters 50%. And so we have a deficit. What have we got to do is to ensure the respect of our rules.
Because from the outside they don't look like that.
What does the Commission say? The Commission says that there was no, sorry for the technical term, effective action, which means enough reduction of as well nominal and structural deficit from 2013 to 2015. We had to say this was not the case. Then it's up to the Council of Ministers, the ECOFIN Council, to follow up or not, immediately or later, on what we say. If they say, okay, now we ask the Commission to take the consequences of that, then we would have to decide on whether we action sanctions between 20 days. And those sanctions can be up to 0.2% of GDP, but also limited under that ceiling and even equal to zero. Again, my role as ECFIN Commissioner, Economic and Finance Commissioner, is to ensure that the pact is applied properly, to respect our rules, but also that these rules cannot be felt as a punition, because we also need to respect the economy of those countries and not to break the economic growth and recovery which is there.
So with Portugal and Spain, are we looking at sanctions in the near future?
It's up to the Council to, now the ball is in the camp of the Council, it's up to the Council then to come back to us when it wants.
Now, Jeroen Dijsselbloem, the head of the Europe Group, he has criticised the EU to some extent, saying that fiscal rules aren't applied systematically. And, he really sees this as a problem, pointing also to France, saying that France gets leeway in the same way.
Again, Jeroen is in his role as president of the Eurogroup. The Commission is also in his role. I'm in my role as ECFIN Commissioner. We agree fully on the fact that the rules have to be implemented, that they have to be respected, and the Commission is there to guard the rules. But these rules
a delay is allowed in the rules.
Are also flexible. These rules are intelligent. These rules are clever. These rules authorize us to have some room of maneuver. But in the end, let's not forget one thing. It's never the Commission which decides alone. The Commission makes the proposals. It's the Member States who decide.
Now, on a more positive note, I believe you feel that the EU will be out of this deficit cycle by 2017.
Yes.
When I read that, I just think of Italy, for example, or Greece. I mean, their debt compared to GDP is, 133%.
If you look at deficits, our forecast is that all deficits will be below 3% in 2017. There are only two countries which could be involved, meaning France and Spain. Both of them have to be under 3% in 2017, and both of them are capable of being under 3% in 2017, and there you may be sure that the Commission will act in order for that to happen. If this is the case, then all countries will be out of what we call the excessive deficit procedure, but we will still have to fight another point. You mentioned Italy, and you mentioned Greece, which is the high burden of public and also private debt. This is an economic question which have to be addressed in the future, and we will have to fight that. But we might then raise new procedures. The best way, in my view, is never to punish by principle. It's always to dialogue with member states and their governments in order for them to take measures to reform and to reduce the deficits and to fight at their own stage public debt.
Very finally, Mr. Moscovici, since this UK vote, a lot of people looking at how we could reform the EU and its institutions. Germany's economic minister, Sigmar Gabriel, has called for the number of EU commissioners to be reduced. He says 27 is too many.
That's not the first time this question was raised. It was already raised I remember I was European Affairs Minister of France in 2000 when we wrote the Nice Treaty. It is a possibility. For the time being, there is one commissioner per member state. I'm not so sure. I usually agree with Sigmar Gabriel that is the first thing we should do. First of all, for the Commission, we need to act faster, to better legislate, to be more open and transparent, and also to communicate better. That's what I try to do with you today.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Mr. Moscovici, but thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks also to you at home for having joined. That brings us to the end of this edition of Talking Europe.